Part 1. The Aftermath of World War I. We begin our story at the end of the First World War. The former Central Powers are suffering the harsh consequences of their defeat. The Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires collapse. Germany, in accordance with the Treaty of Versailles, loses its colonies and numerous territories, mainly to the benefit of the newly re-established Poland, which gains access to the sea, splitting Germany in two. Germany is forbidden to maintain an army of more than 100,000 men, as well as to possess heavy weapons or an air force. Finally, Germany and its allies are declared fully responsible for the war and are forced to pay enormous reparations. The German people perceive this as a humiliation. The only consolation for the country is that no battles took place on its soil. Its infrastructure and industry remain intact. Meanwhile, not all of the victors are satisfied with the outcome of the peace agreements. In Italy, which lost more than 600,000 soldiers during the war and did not receive the territories promised by its allies, public discontent grows. The United States Senate refuses to ratify the Treaty of Versailles because, contrary to President Woodrow Wilson's intentions, it does not wish to join the newly created League of Nations. The mission of this new international organization is to ensure peace and promote cooperation between nations. However, the Soviet Union, which has emerged from the ashes of the Russian Empire after the Civil War, is not allowed to join the League of Nations. Russia, weakened by the loss of its European territories, finds itself isolated, while the West fears the spread of communism. The United Kingdom focuses all its attention on its vast empire, which covers nearly a quarter of the Earth's land surface. France, whose northern regions were particularly devastated by the war, tries single-handedly to ensure the enforcement of the Treaty of Versailles, while the German people refuse to consider it fair. A massive national debt and currency speculation trigger hyperinflation in Germany. The country reduces its reparation payments, and in response, France and Belgium, which rely on those payments for their own reconstruction, send troops to occupy the wealthy industrial Ruhr region. German hyperinflation reaches its peak. One US dollar, worth 4 marks in 1914, is valued at 4.2 trillion marks by November 1923. The face value of some banknotes becomes lower than the price of the paper they are printed on. Part 2. Recovery and the Rise of Extremism. The United States and the United Kingdom put forward a plan to restructure Germany's debt, which leads to the withdrawal of French troops from the Ruhr and a short period of economic recovery. However, all of this remains fragile. The Great Depression, which begins in the United States in 1929, has catastrophic effects on Europe and in particular on Germany. Unemployment soars. In 1932, 6 million Germans are without work. The Weimar Republic is shaken by riots and political instability. Despair pushes the population toward radical movements. The Communist Party grows stronger, but so does the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, an Austrian veteran of the Great War, whose hatred of the Treaty of Versailles and belief in the superiority of the Aryan race find a receptive audience among the German masses. In 1933, Hitler is appointed Chancellor of Germany. He quickly consolidates power, eliminates all opposition, and transforms the Weimar Republic into the Third Reich, a totalitarian regime under his absolute control. Germany begins rearming in secret, in clear violation of the Treaty of Versailles. The economy is revived through massive public works and rearmament programs. Propaganda glorifies the Führer and blames Jews and communists for all of Germany's problems. The persecution of Jews begins immediately, first through laws that exclude them from public life, then through violence and terror. At the same time, in Italy, Benito Mussolini, who has been in power since 1922, creates a fascist regime promoting nationalism, militarism, and the cult of the leader. In Japan, a similar ideology is developing. The military dominates the government, and the empire begins its territorial expansion by invading Manchuria in 1931. The League of Nations condemns these aggressions but does nothing concrete to stop them. The great powers are reluctant to risk another war. Meanwhile, in Spain, the fall of the monarchy in 1931 gives birth to a republic, but the country is deeply divided. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War breaks out between the left-wing Republicans and the right-wing nationalists, led by General Francisco Franco, who receives support from Hitler and Mussolini. The conflict becomes a testing ground for the new German and Italian armies. Despite international outrage, the Western democracies do not intervene. In 1939, Franco's forces achieve victory. Spain becomes a dictatorship sympathetic to the Axis powers, though it will remain officially neutral during the coming world conflict. Part 3. The Road to War. In March 1938, Hitler annexes Austria in what he calls the Anschluss. The annexation takes place without a single shot fired. German troops are welcomed with flowers and cheers by the majority of the Austrian population. Hitler then turns his attention to Czechoslovakia, a young democratic nation that includes the Sudetenland, a region with a large ethnic German population. Claiming that these Germans are being oppressed, Hitler demands that the Sudetenland be integrated into the Reich. The Munich Conference is held in September 1938, bringing together Germany, Italy, France, and the United Kingdom. Neither Czechoslovakia nor the Soviet Union, its ally, are invited. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and French Prime Minister Édouard Daladier agree to Hitler's demands in the hope of preserving peace. This policy of appeasement is celebrated when Chamberlain returns to London, proclaiming that he has secured peace for our time. But in March 1939, Hitler breaks his promise and invades the rest of Czechoslovakia. The illusion of peace collapses. In the same year, Italy invades Albania, and Japan continues its brutal expansion in China, capturing large territories and committing horrific atrocities such as the Nanking Massacre. The Western powers finally realize that Hitler will not stop. When Germany turns its demands toward Poland, Britain and France sign a guarantee of its independence. However, in August 1939, a shocking event changes everything. Germany and the Soviet Union sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty that includes a secret protocol dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. On September 1, 1939, Germany invades Poland using a new form of warfare, Blitzkrieg or Lightning War, which combines tanks, aircraft, and rapid troop movements. 2 days later, France and the United Kingdom declare war on Germany. The Second World War has begun. The Soviet Union, in accordance with the secret protocol, invades eastern Poland on September 17th. By the end of the month, Poland is completely crushed. The Polish government flees to exile in London. Hundreds of thousands of civilians are deported or executed. In the West, a period of calm follows, known as the Phony War, Drôle de guerre, as the French and British armies wait behind the Maginot Line, believing that the fortifications will protect them. Meanwhile, Hitler prepares his next move. Part 4. The Fall of Europe. In April 1940, Germany launches a surprise attack on Denmark and Norway. Denmark surrenders within hours. Norway resists for 2 months, supported by British and French forces, but eventually falls as well. These victories give Germany access to vital iron ore shipments from Sweden and secure naval bases along the North Sea. Then, on May 10, 1940, Germany unleashes its Blitzkrieg on Western Europe. The German army bypasses the heavily fortified Maginot Line by invading through Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Within days, the Netherlands and Belgium are overrun. German tanks break through the Ardennes forest, which the Allies had considered impassable, and reach the English Channel, cutting off Allied troops in Dunkirk. A massive evacuation operation, Operation Dynamo, is organized to rescue British and French soldiers. Between May 26 and June 4th, over 330,000 soldiers are evacuated across the Channel to Britain. On June 10, 1940, Italy declares war on France and the United Kingdom, joining Germany in what will be known as the Axis powers. Only 4 days later, German forces enter Paris. France is defeated. On June 22, Marshal Philippe Pétain signs an armistice with Germany. France is divided. The north and west are occupied by Germany, while the south becomes the Vichy regime, a collaborationist government led by Pétain. Meanwhile, General Charles de Gaulle, refusing to accept the surrender, flees to London and calls on the French people to continue the fight under the banner of the Free French Forces. Hitler now controls almost all of continental Europe. Only Britain stands alone. In the summer of 1940, the German Luftwaffe launches a massive air offensive to prepare for an invasion of the United Kingdom, Operation Sea Lion. This becomes known as the Battle of Britain. For the first time, Hitler's advance is halted. The Royal Air Force, though outnumbered, fights with extraordinary courage. In September 1940, after months of bombing raids, Hitler suspends the invasion plans. Britain survives, but the war is far from over. That same year, the Tripartite Pact formally unites Germany, Italy, and Japan. The Axis alliance is born. Part 5. The Global War begins. In 1941, Hitler turns his attention to the Balkans. Germany's ally, Italy, has invaded Greece from Albania, but the offensive ends in disaster. German forces intervene, invading Yugoslavia and Greece in April. Within weeks, both countries are occupied. Now Hitler prepares for his greatest gamble, the invasion of the Soviet Union, his ideological enemy, and the largest nation on Earth. On June 22, 1941, Germany launches Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. Over 3 million soldiers cross the Soviet border, advancing rapidly across Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states. Entire Soviet armies are encircled and destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners are taken. The Wehrmacht advances deep into Soviet territory, reaching the outskirts of Moscow by the end of the year. But the German blitzkrieg begins to falter. The Red Army regroups and the harsh Russian winter arrives earlier than expected. Hitler's generals beg for a retreat, but he refuses. The offensive stalls and the Germans face their first major defeat. In the meantime, in North Africa, Italian forces struggle against the British. Germany sends reinforcements. The Afrika Korps, led by General Erwin Rommel, who soon earns the nickname the Desert Fox for his daring maneuvers. While Europe burns, Japan continues its expansion across Asia. Having occupied much of China, it now targets the colonies of the Western powers to secure vital oil and resources. Negotiations with the United States fail. On December 7, 1941, Japan launches a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Within hours, 4 American battleships are sunk and thousands of sailors are killed. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declares war on Japan, calling the attack a date which will live in infamy. In response, Germany and Italy declare war on the United States. The conflict is now truly global. The Second World War has spread across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Part 6. The Turning Tide. At the beginning of 1942, the Axis powers seem unstoppable. They control almost all of continental Europe, North Africa, and much of Southeast Asia. But this year will mark the turning point of the war. In the Pacific, the United States quickly reorganizes. After the shock of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy halts Japan's advance at the Battle of Midway in June 1942, sinking 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. This decisive victory shifts the balance of power in the Pacific. Meanwhile, in North Africa, the British Army under General Bernard Montgomery defeats Rommel's forces at El Alamein in October 1942. The Allied victory forces the Axis to retreat westward. In November, the Americans land in Morocco and Algeria, Operation Torch, opening a new front against Axis forces in Africa. But the most dramatic battles are fought in the Soviet Union. The Germans launch an offensive toward the oil fields of the Caucasus and the city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. The fighting there becomes one of the most brutal in history. Street by street, building by building, the Red Army resists with unimaginable courage. In November 1942, Soviet forces launch a massive counterattack encircling the German Sixth Army. Hitler forbids any retreat. By February 1943, after months of siege, starvation, and cold, the German army surrenders. Nearly 300,000 Axis soldiers are killed, wounded, or captured. Stalingrad becomes the symbol of Nazi Germany's downfall. From this moment, the Allies begin to push the Axis back on every front. In the Atlantic Ocean, German U-boats that once terrorized Allied convoys are gradually hunted down thanks to improved tactics, radar, and code breaking. In Italy, after the fall of Mussolini in July 1943, Allied forces land in Sicily and then on the Italian mainland. The Italian government surrenders, but German troops occupy much of the country, turning it into another bloody battlefield. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets win another decisive victory at Kursk in July 1943. The largest tank battle in history. From then on, the Red Army advances relentlessly toward the west. In the air, the Allies bomb German cities day and night, targeting industrial centers and transport networks. Civilian losses are enormous, but the Reich's war machine begins to crumble. By the end of 1943, the Axis powers are on the defensive everywhere. The Allies prepare for the ultimate assault on Western Europe. Part 7. The Fall of the Axis. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launch Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history. More than 150,000 soldiers, Americans, British, Canadians, and other, land on the beaches of Normandy in northern France. After heavy fighting and immense losses, the beachheads are secured. From there, the Allied forces begin their advance through France. On August 25, 1944, Paris is liberated. General Charles de Gaulle marches triumphantly down the Champs-Élysées, declaring that France has regained her freedom. Meanwhile, in the east, the Soviet Red Army pushes through Poland and the Balkans, liberating territory and uncovering the first concentration camps where millions of Jews and other victims have been murdered. In December 1944, Hitler launches one final counteroffensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. For a moment, it surprises the Allies, but the offensive collapses after a few weeks. By spring 1945, Allied forces are advancing from the west, and the Soviets are closing in from the east. On April 25, 1945, American and Soviet troops meet on the Elbe River in Germany. The Third Reich is finished. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler commits suicide in his bunker in Berlin as Soviet troops storm the city. A few days later, on May 8, 1945, Germany surrenders unconditionally. In Europe, the war is over. The day becomes known as Victory in Europe Day, VE Day, but the conflict continues in Asia. Despite devastating defeats, Japan refuses to surrender. The United States begins a brutal island-hopping campaign, capturing one territory after another, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, at terrible cost. To avoid a full-scale invasion of Japan, President Harry S. Truman makes a fateful decision. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber drops the world's first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb destroys Nagasaki. Over 200,000 civilians die in the two bombings. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announces Japan's surrender. The Second World War, the deadliest conflict in human history, with more than 60 million dead, finally comes to an end. Part 8. The New World Order. When the guns finally fall silent in 1945, the world is left in ruins. Entire cities are reduced to ashes, millions are displaced, and economies are shattered. But out of the devastation, a new international order begins to take shape. In San Francisco, representatives of 50 nations gather to create the United Nations, an organization dedicated to maintaining peace and preventing another global conflict. The Nuremberg trials are held in Germany, where leading Nazi officials are prosecuted for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes of aggression. For the first time in history, the world formally recognizes individual responsibility for such atrocities. Meanwhile, in Europe, the continent is divided between two opposing spheres of influence. In the West, Western Europe is rebuilt with American assistance through the Marshall Plan, which provides billions of dollars to help restore industry and stability. In the East, the Soviet Union imposes communist governments across the territories it has liberated. From Poland to East Germany, a line of division, soon called the Iron Curtain, separates Europe into two blocks. Germany itself is split in two, the Federal Republic of Germany in the west and the German Democratic Republic in the east. In 1949, the Western powers form a military alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, to deter Soviet expansion. In response, the USSR later establishes the Warsaw Pact. The ideological rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union marks the beginning of the Cold War, a global confrontation fought through politics, espionage, propaganda, and the threat of nuclear annihilation. At the same time, the collapse of the old European empires gives rise to new nations in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. The world is transformed. The Second World War, which began as a struggle for dominance in Europe, ends by reshaping the entire planet. From the ashes of destruction, humanity enters a new era, one of both hope and fear. The atomic age has begun.